Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Andrea Alexander's background includes over 20 years of working in corporate America. She also has innumerable challenging life events that make her an anxiety relief expert. The unconscious mind is where our pain and emotional patterns reside. Uncovering these patterns and changing the lens of her experiences is how she transformed 5 decades of living as a victim of repressed abuse, transformed it into living in the victory of her love and her power. Andrea did her training at Faith and Wellness and is a certified facilitator, anxiety expert, and transformational mindset coach. She now uses the tools of pure speech and divine body language to uncover the limiting beliefs and wounds that are creating discord and keeping people from their full potential. Andrea uses her own experience and her recovery and shares it with others to make sure they know it is okay to remember and speak into what has happened. When one does that, that is the instant that their own inner darkness turns into light and they can heal. Well, welcome, Andrea and Mark. It's a delight to have you both on the screen with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to have a discussion about a session that Andrea did with Mark. But before we get to that, I'd like, Andrea, if you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
So I spent the first 25 years, this is my story in kind of a nutshell. I spent the first 25 years of my life trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And then right after I got out of college, my father introduced me to self-meditation. And I was doing a meditation and had a memory come through during that meditation that was so frightening. I sat bolt right up and there was still no memory, but it was in that moment that I realized there's nothing wrong with me, that something happened to me. And I had long had this experience or feeling in my body that there was physical, sexual trauma, but I didn't have any memories. And so my mission became to remember so that I believed, because I believed that I could fix it if I knew. And so that was the next close to 25 years trying to find a way to remember and tap into what happened to me. And I finally aligned myself with a woman who was an EMDR coach. And she and I were having a session around my former spouse, actually. And I was talking about my proverbial walls of protection, and they'd always been right here. And in this moment, I'm talking to her and my hands are completely extended. And I'm like, that's different. And she said, are you keeping something in or are you keeping something out? And I was yet to know. And so what I did is I had this discussion with my mother about my father, because I was having all these wonky things about my dad come up in me that I didn't understand how to express. And I was not willing to look if I believed it was my father. And so through that conversation, my mother and I felt very secure about saying this has nothing to do with my dad. And so I was willing to look at the memories. And so we jumped into that and memories began to come in. And I did work with that around my inner child, created boundaries, negotiated with her. And I remembered some of the things that happened to me. And my belief, as I said, was that if I remembered, then I could do something with it. Well, what happened from that is I began to experience panic and anxiety attacks that were so debilitating. I was having 10 to 15 a day. And so I felt like I was full of bees. My skin crawled, and I literally ran the majority of my life in this one little corner of my sofa, which I lovingly called my corner office at the time. And over a period of about 2 years with talk therapy, more EMDR therapy, lots of medication, the panic attacks began to ebb. And I just remember talking about how I didn't like how I feel. I don't like how I feel, because they were telling me you're anxious, you're this, you're this. And I'm like, I just don't like how I feel. And so after I moved through the majority of that, I'd have one or two good, what I would call a good day a month. And I said to myself, there's got to be more than this. And I had a class show up. I spoke to the universe. A class showed up in my email and I went to it. And it was this group of women coaches talking about consciousness, the power of our words, how our words create our reality. We talked about the subconscious does 95% of the work in our bodies, and that we're continually recreating these experiences and holding on to them with our words. And she said our body talks to us. Has its own language. And I'd done some reading with Louise Hay, and I was a huge proponent of hers, and that was kind of working for me, but I was kind of at a spot where I felt really stuck. And so something that these women said, I didn't understand really, but I knew there was something in this for me. And so they asked for a volunteer, and I volunteered first. And she asked me what hurts, and I said my thumb. And so she began to give me what I now know are decrees. And she says, I willingly let go. And she gave me others to continue to repeat. And I had this flood of emotion come in. My voice almost completely dissipated. And then I felt this strength return. And the pain in my thumb completely dissipated. And so I knew there was something in this for me. I just was yet to know what it was. And so I did a lot of the work by myself till I could no longer take myself any further. And I hired one of the coaches. And after a couple of weeks, I went to a retreat. And in that retreat, she took pictures of our eyes. And the mission and purpose of our life can be found in our eyes. And I was totally fascinated by it. And we used it a little bit in the retreat. And then I returned afterwards and did a full eye reading with her. And I remember the first question she asked me is, have you fully forgiven your mother? And I said, yes. And there was no response. And what I have learned over the last 7 years is I'm still forgiving my mother, because all of the things that we learn as children, that we take in as children between the ages of at least 0 to 5, and likely even further into that, we become our limiting beliefs, the lens that which we see through life. And it's what we believe is what we create. And because I didn't remember, I still blamed my mother for not knowing, for not understanding, until I could see that was what was acting in me. And then I get to be different about it and how I play with it and what comes up in my body. And one of the things that is so profound about the eye readings is that we can track and see the changes in our DNA structure. And so science has told us that every thought, feeling, and word that we speak, think, or say creates a brain peptide. The brain peptide is the part of the DNA protein. And so we're having these thoughts, these limiting beliefs. We're saying things to ourselves that are changing our DNA, causing dis-ease, disease, because we're uncomfortable with what we feel. And so when we begin to change our words, when we begin to understand what's at the root cause of why we feel the way that we feel, we then welcome ourselves to choose to have and be something different. And so I got real busy trying to learn how to read eyes because it's fascinating for me. And I've collapsed a lot of limiting beliefs over the last 7 years through using my eye reading work. And so one of the lenses that I have changed is the reason for my experience with my perpetrator was so that I can speak for other men and women who have something similar in their lives, and that there is a way through. All of the guilt and shame that I used to sabotage myself, my body, my life, I now use as a way to connect with people. I know how to be with them because of that. And I have forgiven my uncle I've seen him in God's light, because we know that we repeat the patterns of the things that we are taught. And so it is my mission and purpose to speak to others and share with them my experience. And using the eyes is one of the ways I do that.
Wonderful. And so now you've had a session with Mark. How long
Yes.
ago was that session?
What, 3 weeks ago? About 3
That
weeks.
sounds about right. Yeah,
Mhm.
actually October 19th. So it's, yeah.
Almost on the money.
And for me, it's important when we do a podcast like this or a video like this that we let people know that Alexander, you're somewhere in Texas, and Mark, you're somewhere in Illinois near Chicago, and I'm about an hour away from Mark. So you did this without being in the room with Mark, right? So what was the
Correct.
process? Take us a little bit through the structure so people can get an idea of what a session is like and how it happens remotely.
Exactly. And so what I have this little 5-minute video that I share with my clients that tells them how to take photographs of their eye. I have a super expensive camera, and yet phones work great. And so it's simply just how to hold your lids open, to zoom in, to look straight, to look up, and to look down. And we always begin with the left eye because it's our feminine divine side, which is our receiving. And then we do the masculine on the other. And then they send me or text me their photos. There's often what I call flailing. There, I can't get it, and it's not showing up, and it's not clear. And I always chuckle with this because everything in consciousness can be translated. And I know that the movement has already began because they're going to experience discomfort in being seen. And it's where our subconscious little self, our egoic self, is flailing because it knows that something is about to shift. And so I just be with whatever comes up. All I really require is 1 or 2 really clear signals in an eye to get moving. And so then they send that to me by the day of. I upload it, and then we get on a Zoom call, and I ask them a couple of questions about themselves, why they chose to jump in, and I begin to explain a little bit about the eye. The white part of the sclera is how we interact or feel about our outer world. Those in our family, our friends, our jobs, anything that's in our environment. And then the iris is how we've taken things in ourself and how we feel about ourself. And the pupil is obviously reflective of how we feel about being seen, and or the things that we've seen. And it's where our light comes in. And so one of the things that I say is that when we have divine union, masculine, feminine, receiving and doing, we have a singular light behind the eye. And so I've seen, experienced with others who have gone from brown eyes to blue eyes. And those of us who are green-eyed, there is no actual true green eye. The green comes from tremendous amounts of compulsion, trauma, the yellows and oranges in our eyes that cause the blues to turn to green. So it's amazing work.
All right. So Mark, what was this process like for you?
It is fascinating. It really is. I've done a lot of inner work. I've done a lot of different modalities. I even knew that certain body parts can contain like a map or I know like the ear contains a lot. I knew about that, but not the eye as much. I always thought of the eyes being more functional, even though there's a lot talked about the light in the eye and things of that nature. But looking at the photos, what happens, because Andrea brings up one of the eye images, and then you can see all the other ones too, and points out like little squiggly lines and different colorings and variations and interpreting them. And she was right on. I mean, she was just spot on. Like from the word go, one of the uh, thing she picked up right away was my receiving, that I had an issue with receiving. And that went back to create an idea of deserving. And it was a nice, gentle, conversation. It wasn't going real deep and emotional or anything, but it was just recognizing, if my mom said no to a candy bar, me as a kid may have interpreted that as I didn't deserve the candy bar, so it doesn't matter how big or small a thing is. And that has shown up in my life in a variety of different ways. Another area was, is there something wrong with me, that I also had, in my eyes there, and how through rejection early on, and she could pick all this up in the eye, but through rejection early on, I felt like I kept looking for, well, why are people rejecting me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I had a mental health crisis between 2011 and 2014. And, she was pointing out, like, it was sort of a culmination of finding something wrong. It's like showing, like, oh, here's what's wrong with you. So it came out as mania for me. Another thing that came out that was really interesting is there was a rose color around my pupil, and I had blue eyes, but as she zoomed in, she could see the color. Just like, that's your intestinal tract, which also deals with receiving. And it was kind of this idea of, I won't take it in, and blocking. So I was really blocking my receiving. So we did a lot of work on that, and the declarations, which I'm very used to declarations. I do them in coaching with people as well. But Andrea is gifted and very talented at creating and navigating me, and sure whoever through those declarations. And we hit on support. We hit on codependence, which I never thought I was codependent, but she highlighted, here's what that means. And it's like, wow, that's very eye-opening.
Literally.
Excuse the pun. Oops.
Perfect.
And a big thing, probably, one of the most impactful was just how it influenced me in speaking freely. For most of my life, I had really withheld, and she could see that in the eye too. And it's not just pointing out, like, oh, here's what's going on with you, but the support is really a coaching process, and creating the declarations is really supporting the unwinding of it. And it was really refreshing. She used a word I'd never heard before. She called it the God genius. And around the pupil, she could see, and because the color, the pupil can get bigger, as we heal, we can expand or maybe the pupil or the iris or whatever it is.
Actually the iris.
Okay. So the iris can expand. So she could see the white area. She's like, oh, that's all the area of opportunity, to really unlock the God genius, within me. And I'm sure everyone has, various, levels of that. But I thought that was really interesting. Like, oh, so the work I've been doing over the last several years on myself, on really unwinding the past and the issues and the belief systems that were in my way, she could see, and even the fact of layers. There are veins that pop, that we can see the red in the white, like little squiggly lines. And she could see layers beneath and highlighted for me. She's like, that is indicative of a lot of inner work that you've done, that they're fading. And so that demonstrated to me that, oh, so it's not just, this is who you are, and, your eyes just representing it. It's like the eyes keeping tabs on, like, hey, this is where you're going to, this is your progress. It shows all of it. It's really quite fascinating.
The most interesting signal in your eye, I love that you remember the pink ring. And the reason that was fascinating for me is because I had that in my eye too when I began. And my coach said, oh, you're hardwired to receive, because we talk about greatest weakness shall be our greatest strength. And so Mark, part of his mission and purpose in life is to open himself up to allow and receive, and not only canceled, not to to allow things to come in and to assimilate and let go, because it's not just I receive. We require walking ourselves into this movement, which it literally is, in baby steps. And he's saying declarations, and that's super cool. Decrees, which are based, a lot of my decrees are based in scripture, different from religion, but because they closely mimic quantum physics and laws of the universe. I am that which I say I am. And so the baby step, the decrees are created from his own words, his own movement. And that's what I do with all of my clients. And it's because of what I have done in the past. I know what works. And so we may start with, I give myself permission to remember. I give myself permission to receive. Because if we go right into, I am a millionaire, it jumps over the entirety of the feeling of what we believe. And we are literally changing belief systems. He didn't believe he deserved. And the word deserve is of service to self. And so if you just go, I deserve, we've been saying that to ourselves our whole life. We're trying to get our head and our hearts to befriend each other. And it's been really difficult. So these little baby things are beautiful. And because of transgenerational trauma, which we're very familiar with, at least 4 generations, these signals are in our eyes. We've got all of the traumatic, somatic stuff stored in our bodies. It just shows up in our eye with ease. It can be seen through the different vascular systems, the different colors that come up, the length, the shape, the squiggly, the forking of blood vessels that show up in the location map within the eye, which is exactly the same as any iridology. You use the same map. And my favorite signal for him to play with was, so in his left eye, direct, like very center up, which is old. All of the things in the whites that are underneath the lids are very old. And there is a vessel that is literally bulging about halfway down. And then there's something, this is just coming to me as I speak to you. It's beginning to come through and into your conscious world. And I asked you about the signal. And because it has to do with his God genius. And I asked him the question about where have you been putting pressure on yourself to create life? And he said, I've died 1,000 times. I was like, holy moly. And some people may say, well, how do you know that? There's just God in us knows. We're remembering how to listen to ourselves. And he shared with me that he had a project that he had started and worked on and put aside because in these past lives, he had spoken into his own truth and it had been put to death. So he's held on to this. And I'm aware that he's walking into it. And he'll share that if he chooses to. So that it's just absolutely amazing. All kinds of things show up and you're like, I remember being with a girl one time and I said, that looks like a leaf. Do you have an experience as a child where something with a pile of leaves? And she said, yes. And she was raped. I have no way of knowing this. It's just where I see things that seem like an anomaly to me. And I just ask the question. I ask what I hear. I did one recently and a girl had this big 5 mark in her iris. And she's the last of 5 children. And there's a lot of separation. So it's just, we play with what I see. I ask the questions, the memories come in. I support you in creating a new belief and how to actually rebuild that belief is to use the decrees and repeat them with regularity because the conscious mind loves repetition. And what's fascinating is the layers begin to shift and change. And so have you had an experience, or what are you aware of that is different for you with risk? Is there anything specific that you're aware of that shifted in you since our eye reading?
The biggest thing for receiving has been, for example, I have, which I didn't have before, but I was really drawn to create kind of, it's not a vision board, but it's really recognizing what are the things I'm working on, what are the things that are out there, and celebrating the receiving of them, even though they haven't come into physical manifestation yet. So just recognizing like, oh, I'm so, happy and grateful, to have this, with regard to a book I'm working on. There's another one that's related to a business, relationships. So really just, I took a lot of inventory and have been daily actually looking at that like, okay, hey, I'm doing a meditation around receiving and allowing and opening up to.
And so I imagine there's more things that have come into your world that you may yet to be aware of. And
I'm sure.
So one of the things I would ask you is I would ask you, one of the things I choose to know is, have you experienced receiving your wife any differently?
Not really, from the standpoint, she just took off for a vacation with her sisters for a wedding shower. I mean, the more so with regard to just acknowledging myself and being willing and deserving, that's been heightened.
Awesome. And it's going to start with baby steps, because intimacy in life, which includes relationship, it includes sex, it includes money, it includes passion, it includes creativity. And the word intimacy translates into me, I see. And the creative stuff is very passionate for you. And it's an easy way for you to begin to see and recognize what's changing, because it's intimacy in yourself and less than with other intimate partners. And so it makes sense to me that that's where it's showing up for you right now. And be aware. Be aware of things that shift in your personal relationships, things that you are doing differently, that you are saying differently, because this is where we let love touch us. And that's most of my clients. Okay, now say, I let my love touch me. And they're like, no.
I'll do that. I let my love touch me.
And say it again and slow down so that you can feel the vibration of your own words.
I let my love touch me.
And breathe. Because breath is the initial, very first receiving. And the exhale is the letting go of what we believed we couldn't do.
Yeah. And there's a lot of energy that was moving as I was saying that and breathing. I could feel it kind of releasing, if you will.
Did you get hot?
I did. I'm in a cold room now.
I get hot. Our metabolism engages because we're engaging our will, which is our sovereignty, our authority, our true power. Because walking into I let love touch me may have been the scariest thing anybody's ever done in their life. Because we've been building these walls, which show up in the eye as this dark gray, dark black, brown, or ring that goes completely around the pupil, which is a wall of protection, a wall of amnesia, a wall of
does that go away? Like, because
yes.
You showed that to me on mine. There was that film kind of thing. And it's like, so over time, does that release?
Yes, it will dissipate. My eyes used to be like totally yellow, almost. Lots of squiggly, which is the lymphatic, which is overwhelmed, fear, anxiety, compulsion, control, because trying to control our world because we feel so insecure about it. And I say insecure as in unsafe. And so those lines are straight in my eyes today. My walls have shifted. The pink ring is gone. I used to have an area that was kind of bulging out that is now more flat. And I had a lot of orange trauma spots that are continuing to dissipate, lacunas that are filling in. And so the more that we do, that we will see permanent change, and it's permanent changes, which is fascinating, because when we change the way that we feel about what we feel and we begin to speak into the truth of how we feel, I let love touch me, which is what we've all desired in our life, but we've been too afraid to let it in. We begin to be secure in those things. We speak to ourselves differently. We have new hormones being created because of how sweetly we are talking in us, through us, and around us. And so when we do this work, it's Herring's law, where the first thing that shows up, and then we can have a complete reversal when we fully believe in the transformation, because what we believe is what we create. So we're changing beliefs, and it's the repetition of decrees that sets that in place.
Well, and I will say it was along those lines of kind of reinforcing and believing, going back and watching the video again, and I'll watch it again. Now that I've watched it once, I realized how much value there was. There's so much richness in that I missed, in the moment, because I was doing it, so to go back was really helpful.
Yes, there's huge value in that recording. And if you have yet to, when you listen again, I encourage you to write the decrees that you said during that, and read those. Like I said, subconscious lives repetition. What I typically do with myself, or I recommend to my clients, is that they actually record those decrees, and you speak out, me, love, me, and then pause to give your subconscious brain time to repeat it, and then the next one. And then what I do is I put it on a loop and slide it under my pillow so only I can hear it, and I take it into sleep with me, because then you've got 8 hours of this loop of decrees, and you will move quickly. The patterns will begin to shift very rapidly.
I'm going to do that. You mentioned that before, and I didn't log it as clearly as I just did.
Yes, it's why there's so much value in the recording. And what'll be fun is when you're ready to jump in and do another one in a few more months, you may choose 2 or 6 months. And when you begin to see the shifts in your eyes, your own eyes, and because there's so much happening that we're doing, we're just yet to be aware of how amazing we are, because we haven't felt deserving. We haven't felt valuable. So delimiting ourselves. And this is just a raising and a remembering of what I say is me. I'm remembering God. I am God, remembering I am God, because we are that one drop of spirit filled full. And we have the power to create our lives exactly as we choose, when we know that we can speak into it and how to. And I've probably shared this with you. It's one of my favorite things. I have a girlfriend who says there's a 12-foot angel at the front door. She's here to take your order for life. And you're like, oh, I just want peace. They don't know what it means. We order sandwiches and salads with more specificity than we order life. And they don't know what to do. They are here for our bidding. So when we begin to speak the language of our heart, which is what our real choices are, based on our mission and purpose, the things that we're remembering is where we get to create a life that we love.
So I would like you to give us your working definition for codependence, since so many people are different. And that was something Mark said that he got from the first session. How do you work with that? What's your description of codependence?
I love this. So when I first started doing this work, my coach gave me this big long list of everything to check off. And there, like, codependence was on there and shame was on there. Those are the only two I didn't check off. I'm not codependent. I don't have any shame. Two greatest things I'm here to do is move codependence and shame. And so codependency, many people believe that is a weakness. Codependent is when anything or anybody in our known reality does or says something that irritates us. So if we're frustrated by the train, we've got the dog that is pooped in the middle of the living room, our husband or our spouse says something that irritates us. And so if we're reacting to what others are doing, there's something off within us. They're a mirror of what's going on. And so I say codependency is gold because it reminds us of what we're here to shift, change, and move. And it's the fastest way into the root of what is creating our disease, dis-ease, uncomfort in life. So, for example, if I have a flat tire, I can translate that because what is my car? My car is how I move forward in life. What is the ride? It's my hand. Where am I not loving something that I've been handed or handled? And how do I feel about that? And so I can get all irritated. I can think about the money. I can think about all other stuff. I'm like, or I can use it as a reflection of what's going on in me. And I can also shape I can't get to where I need to go by a specific time. This may be saving my life. Yet to know. And so when we can, because the only thing we have the power to do in life is how we react to whatever is acting in us. And so when I get frustrated, when I get irritated, when I have fear come up, what in me is what I ask myself. And so codependency is the gold for where we're here to remember our sovereignty to choose for ourselves, because there's so much guilt and shame about giving ourselves care, taking care of ourselves first. And we're running depleted because we're trying to please everybody else.
That's very close to the working definition we use in the core work that gave rise to the Optimal Being program. And that is that codependence is defined as any time I think or speak as though someone or something outside of me is causing my emotional reaction. And
yes, you made me.
That's almost exactly what I heard you saying in your description of it.
Exactly.
And therefore, there's the roadmap to what I need to resolve or change. The Way of Mastery says reactivity of any kind of negative reactivity indicates the need for forgiveness. And in that work, the word forgiveness means the dismantling of an errant perception.
I like that.
Right. So I've made a picture in my mind that what happened out there is causing this in me, and that's just false.
Yes.
And so I need to dismantle that errant perception anytime I have a negative response to anything.
And so
then it opens that window to be able to see what's actually creating the negativity within me.
Yes. And people think it's their husband. They think it's but it's actually, so every single feeling that we have is a vibration that at some time happened in our body. The first time it happened, we were in a situation. So we labeled it based on that. That feels like fear. So I talked about my B's feeling when I was in anxiety. And I thought it was scared. And so I read something earlier this year that talked about the buzzing in the body is the return of life. And so I had been believing that all of this, it was more feeling than I had ever felt in my entire life. My body had been so frigging numb for 50 years, afraid to feel. I don't like what I feel. And so when I realized that was me coming back to life, and I'd never been alive in my body like that before. So we get to qualify what we feel. There is no right or wrong. It is only how we label it. So we are the qualifiers of our own feelings and experiences. Getting ready to come onto the podcast this morning, I was like, I feel really nervous. There's two doctors, and I'm this girl who does this stuff and saw your lineup in the past. And I remember I'm here for a reason, and I get to qualify. I'm excited. So I sat with myself, I put my feet on the floor, and I breathed and I grounded, and I remember how powerful I am. And so when we are getting irritated or frustrated, we're giving our power away. And every feeling that we raise has a partner. So like you said, irritation on the other side, irritation, frustration, anger is forgiveness. It's also authority. I author my own life. It's also will. I stand in my own will and I do what I choose to do for me for no reason. So shame is a return to purity. Guilt is a return to innocence. Fear is a return to faith and trusting life. And so all of this stuff that we've been taught, we get to completely reframe through our codependent patterns when we will see that everything can be translated. And using others is the easiest mirror in the world to show us where we're out of alignment with ourselves.
All right. Well, that's powerful stuff. And when you talk about the bees, the buzzing feeling, the anxiety that you were having, the panic attacks, it puts me to mind of Peter Levine and his work, and especially the book Waking the Tiger, where he talks about how when we've had trauma, physical, sexual, etc., we shut down the sensations and the awareness of the sensations. And so he actually has exercises in that book for people to reawaken.
I've done those. I've used Peter Levine. That's all. Yes.
So the other thing I want to do here is recognizing how much time we have. I'd like to have each of you get centered and take a breath and just think about what we've talked about so far. If there's anything in that you want to go back and highlight, or something we haven't even mentioned yet, and give you each a few minutes to respond to that. If you just get centered, what's something that you want to make sure we get in here that we haven't talked about, or something you want to go back and highlight? And since you just finished an exposition, Andrea, let's go to Mark and see if he's got something he wants to add here.
Two things, yeah. So I want to clarify one thing. Andrea had mentioned earlier that whole God genius and the fear, and I've died, and that the words that came out of my mouth were something like I've died 1,000 deaths, and I've died many times in my own life, in this physical life, from the spirit, the letting go, the dying of the mask. But what I was referencing energetically there was the lineage of death, not necessarily my past life, but the lineage of death, that a lot of stories that I have and the energy in my system is that, hey, if I speak out, that there are possible ramifications. And one of the things that shifted for me since we did the session is a courage. I'm bringing out a new book called The Lowly Prophet, and it's going to challenge some people. And this is one where it's a beautiful book. It's a lot of fun. I've had some, my book person gave some really positive feedback, and it's just, okay, am I really going to put this out there where I know not everyone's going to like it? Some people are going to love it, and some people are going to, really not like it. And that's part of that courage that, has been developing. And so one of the exercises we did there was to free my voice, to allow for me to step more fully into that. And so I really appreciate that. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And the second thing is, I love the work here from a very grounded basis. If we can see that the eye reports this, and then we make modifications, and now the eye reports this, and we make modifications, and now the eye reports this. There's something about the engineer in me that thinks that's so cool, because many people go through, deep inner work, and there's a knowing that, okay, I'm no longer the person I was. I can see the contrast. It's so significant, such a big deal. And yet most of the world doesn't see anything different. It's like, well, that's still Mark. And so to have evidence, there's something comforting for me about that, wait, this is really cool. Like, I could come back every 6 months and see the progress, kind of like a blood test or something like that. So I just want to acknowledge that this is one of maybe a couple that I could count on one hand of things that are measurable in this kind of work. So I really appreciate it extremely.
Yes, it's so fun to take pictures of my own eyes with regularity to see, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? What is showing up? And it's super, super cool. This work has literally changed my life. And you talked about being able to track, and some people just, well, that's just Mark. We meet people in our lives as we come along, and we're no longer who we used to be. I don't recognize myself. And I'm so grateful for what I've done. This is amazing work. We either let go of our victim mentality, and do the work that's required and choose life, or we stay where we are. So if you want change, it must be, we're the transformation of our own lives. And what I love about this work is it's simple and it's fairly easy when there's a lot of fear that'll come up, and we have a way to look at it and see the differences, see the changes. And it's put me on mission and purpose, and I'm so grateful. I love what I do.
Wonderful. Well, it'll be in the notes and other places, but what's the best way for people to reach you if they want to find out more, Andrea?
The easiest thing to do is to email me directly, andrea.alexander@embodycoaches.com, and I can point them in a direction to connect.
And the website is?
embodycoaches.com.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you both for taking the time to share with us, and the honesty, and love hearing about various techniques that are doing much the same thing. And as Mark said, one that gives you some feedback about the progress you're making. So thank you both for taking the time to be here. It's been an honor.
Thank you. I appreciate this, both of you, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you.
Andrea Alexander's background includes over 20 years of working in corporate America. She also has innumerable challenging life events that make her an anxiety relief expert. The unconscious mind is where our pain and emotional patterns reside. Uncovering these patterns and changing the lens of her experiences is how she transformed 5 decades of living as a victim of repressed abuse, transformed it into living in the victory of her love and her power. Andrea did her training at Faith and Wellness and is a certified facilitator, anxiety expert, and transformational mindset coach. She now uses the tools of pure speech and divine body language to uncover the limiting beliefs and wounds that are creating discord and keeping people from their full potential. Andrea uses her own experience and her recovery and shares it with others to make sure they know it is okay to remember and speak into what has happened. When one does that, that is the instant that their own inner darkness turns into light and they can heal.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.